Good morning.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone who has joined our webinar this morning. I can see a few people are still just coming in, so we'll get started and we'll send the link afterwards. Thank you again for joining. Like I just said, we today have Mark Radda with us, guest speaking on our latest masterclass, Elevating Your Brand. So just to do a few bits of housekeeping. Your mics are currently, attendees' mics are currently on mute, but you can contact us via the chat function and the Q&A function. So please feel free to send Mark as many questions as you like, and we'll go through them at the end. So this session is being recorded, so if you have any technical difficulties or have to go away for any reason, we will be following up with the video on YouTube and a link to any resources Mark has mentioned. So don't worry, we'll get everything to you. So today's masterclass is a very practical session by Mark, and Mark will be outlining within his session, he'll be outlining the 9 key things that you can do and action to get your hospitality brand ready for the next challenging situation that's obviously the hospitality industry as we know it. So whether you're opening in July or postponing or just wanting to get ahead of the game, this session will be very practical for you and provide you with some key things to do. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction on Mark. Mark has 25 years of branding, marketing and change management experience. He has worked with brands such as Raffles and the London 2012 Olympics in terms of getting and evolving and re-energizing brands to have the most impact and create a value with them within the industry. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mark. So like I said, please feel free to ask as many questions as you can in the Q&A chat. Mark, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Georgia. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. What I want to do is to talk a little bit about brands. But before I start, I just wanted to show this picture. This was a picture that I took in the skies of Cambridge, where I live, on Thursday night when we were all out clapping for carers. And we heard the buzzing of an aeroplane, and the plane came, swooped around and drew this face in the sky. Another plane came next to it and drew a heart. And what was really cool about this was it got everybody talking. Everyone looked at this thing, spoke about this man in the plane drawing this face. It all became part of the community conversation that we were having. But the interesting thing is, it wasn't the first time this man had done this. Quite often when it's a beautiful, clear blue sky in Cambridge, you hear the sound of a plane and you look up and this man comes and draws a face, a smiley face, and it makes you feel good about the world. And the key thing about that is, what it is you know what to expect from this man. If you hear the plane sound on a beautiful sunny day, you know what to expect. You know that there's going to be this face drawn in the sky. And really, that gives you a great pleasure. And that's what brands are all about. Brands are about knowing what to expect. And also, those brands giving you a degree of joy, a degree of happiness. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what brands are and how you can help to improve your brand in this particular situation, the COVID-19 situation that we all find ourselves in. As Georgia said, I've got lots of experience, 25 years of it, worked with lots of really interesting brands, and it's all about helping brands have clarity. So let's just talk about some basics, and I apologize for those people who are brand experts on this call, but there are a number of things that we just need to get in place when we start thinking about brands. Brands aren't logos, brands aren't names, brands are much, much more than that. So at the most basic level, brands are about helping people identify. If you walk along a supermarket aisle, you look at a can, you know what's being sold and you know who's selling it because of the branding on that tin. But better brands are about trust. So Coca-Cola, you can see a Coke bottle anywhere in the world. You can pick it up, you can drink it, you know what to expect. You know that it'll be safe, you know it'll taste the same. So brands are also about trust. It's about a confidence in what's being delivered, an expectation. Brands are also about expectation. So if you take Apple, it still amazes me that people will queue up outside an Apple store at 2 o'clock in the morning to buy a new Apple product that they might have read about, but they've never held, they've never tried it. but people know what to expect from Apple. So they want to have that product and they're prepared to put their money on the line because they trust Apple and they know what to expect. So brands are also about expectations. And brands are also about desire. So this little box that you see there, people know that that's a Tiffany box. They know that what's in it is going to be beautiful. They know that it's going to be something that they want. So brands are also about desire. And the key thing about brands is a powerful brand can help you add value. So if you buy a white t-shirt, you can spend £4 and buy it from Primark. And it'll be okay. It'll be a white t-shirt. You can spend a little bit more, £16, get the same thing from French Connection. It probably won't be £16 difference in quality you're paying for the brand. You could go even more expensive to Ted Baker or even Prada. But the difference in the quality is not going to be that pronounced. What you're paying for there is the brand. That brand has value and people are prepared to pay more for it. So great brands are also about value. And I think the way I like to talk about brands, the definition I prefer to use about brands, is that brand is a perception, and it's a perception in the minds of consumers, staff, stakeholders, the public. And if you can make that perception coherent and compelling, then it will add more value to your brand. It'll create something that people want. So what you're all about in defining your brand, it's about a perception. It's about making sure that you have a clear perception and you're building that perception. And that perception comes from two things. There's a logical side to it. There's facts that people will use when they're judging whether to buy a brand. So if you were buying a car, it would be about price, it would be about safety, reliability, fuel efficiency, insurance costs, all of those things. But there's also an emotional side of buying a brand. If you're buying a car, it's a statement about you as much as it is a mode of transport. So there's something that's helping you to influence your decision that's based on fun and enjoyment. It's about the pride and passion you have for it. It's about what that brand says about you. So when you're building a brand, you also have to consider logic and emotion. And there are lots of models that you can use for brands. And this is one that I use quite often for the hotel industry. So at the heart of a brand is the promise that you're making, the thing that you're promising to the world, the thing that you're bringing to them. Behind that, underpinning that promise, there are a set of pillars. And these pillars are the 5 or 6 key assets or signatures of your hotel. That might be your location. It might be the way that you do service. It might be the way your rooms are configured. It could be about your bar. It could be about the way that you connect with the community. There'll be 5 or 6 different pillars that sit under that. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later. There are also values that define how you behave. And then there's the personality, which is the way that you're seen. All of those things add together. And if you think about it as a person, you make a judgment about a person based on their personality. You decide whether you're going to talk to a person based on their personality, the way they dress, the way they behave, the way they communicate with you. Same with a hotel. People will make a judgment based on the way that you're communicating to the world. If they like your personality, they'll carry on talking to you, carry on interacting with you. They then might get to understand your values. They'll then get to understand the pillars. Ultimately, they'll get to understand your promise. So all of those things have to work together in harmony. And once you have those in place, it's not just about communications in the way that you express those. You have to make sure that that brand and those elements of that brand are expressed everywhere across your communications, across the behavior of your staff, across your environment, in your products and services. So that definition becomes absolutely key to the way that you communicate and the way that you create an experience for the world. But hotel brands have a problem. Hotel brands are becoming increasingly commoditized. It's really, really hard to differentiate between different hotel brands. You know, if you think about a Marriott or a Hilton and you ask people what the differences are, people will really struggle to define what the differences are. And that's because there's been a huge explosion of brands. There are loads and loads of brands in the hotel world. They're often using very generic language, generic images like the typical one of the infinity pool and somebody gazing into the distance, or somebody lying in the spa with some stones on the back. They're all using the same sort of language, the home from home, the iconic landmark. They talk about redefining luxury or a luxury lifestyle. So they're the same messages. You also see that brands are using the same values. They talk about trust and professionalism. There's no difference in the values. And quite often what we're finding is that those brands have been created not for the consumer, but for the operators, to enable them to offer more brands to people so that they can put more brands into the market. And what's happening as a result of that is customer focus is being lost, and there's a loss of value. So we already had a problem before COVID came along. This commoditization of hotel brands was really, really not helping the industry. And in the situation we're in now, we have to be even more hot on brands, because when things become challenging, brands become really, really important. A good brand can give you focus. So every time you communicate to the marketplace, you're reinforcing something about yourself. They can guide your behavior. They can help you emphasize what's important to you as a hotel. They can also define your priorities. They can define what are the things the most important to you in the marketplace. They can help to reinforce what makes you different. So it's really important, particularly now, that you have a strong, strong focus on brands. And you can have a look, you can see this based on the reaction of some other brands. There have been some real losers in this particular situation. So Sports Direct, for example, they kept their stores open when everybody else was shut. They claimed that their stores were essential because they were about health. They forced their staff to come into work. And then when they were told, actually, you can't open, it seemed that they increased their prices on certain products. And as a result of that, that perception of what their brand was about, their brand reputation has decreased throughout this COVID situation. And that's at odds with what they say about themselves. We value our people, our customers, our shareholders. So they've really lost their value because of the way that their brand behaved. Same with Tesla. Elon Musk talks about the fundamental goodness of Tesla, but they continued production in COVID, even though they weren't supposed to. He's now threatening to leave California as their HQ because of the restrictions they put in place. Their workers have been called back and they've been told that they may lose their benefits. These are all the way things are being reported. Whether they're true or not, I don't know, but this is the way the brand is being perceived. And that goes completely against the fundamental goodness of Tesla that Musk talks about. So they've really lost their way. But other brands have come out of this really, really well. Pret, which has always had a really strong brand definition, has come out of it well. Initially, they put really strong safety measures in for staff. They then started to offer free hot drinks and discount for the NHS. They then shut all their shops, but reopened a few near hospitals. So they did things that responded based on the way that their brand is, in a way that actually appealed to people in the community. Mercedes have done a really similar thing. They focused on what they do well, which is engineering. So they created some continuous positive air pressure devices, which could be used in hospitals. So delivered those to hospitals. They used a very practical way to demonstrate their engineering prowess, which is at the heart of their brand. So they used this to reinforce their brand values, but also to do good. So there've been some real winners out of this. And we all saw some winners and losers in the hotel industry. So the Britannia-owned hotel, which sent a message out to staff telling them that they were all being fired and evicted. Similar thing in a more positive way, where hotels have responded by offering key workers accommodation. So there have been winners and losers on both sides, but these are really based on making sure that your brand is powerful. So what I think you should be doing as a hospitality brand, now is a very, very good time to take stock of your brand. We have a time where we're paused, but we can take stock of who you are, what you bring to the world, and why this matters, and also how you can be more relevant to the new world. And I think what's important here is this isn't about reinventing yourself. We're the same people who've gone in to this situation as who will be coming out. We might have a changed attitude, we might have a changed focus, but our heart is exactly the same. We're the same person, and you're the same hotels. And what we need to do is make sure that we keep that focus of what you are, what makes you special, but we respond in a way which demonstrates our changed attitude and our changed focus and our realization that the world has changed as well. So I'm going to take you through 9 steps that I think you could be taking now which would help improve your brand as we come out of this. So the first thing I think you should do, and this is something that we would always do when defining a brand, is having a look at what you're saying to the world. So it's a really good opportunity now to look at how you're communicating to the world. Review your communications that you're sending to the world. Look at the PR, look at your website, look at social media. Look at the messages you're saying. Look at the tone of voice. Look at the actions that you're taking within your hotel, your environments, your products. And try and assess from those what it is that you're saying. What's the one thing that comes out most strongly of all the communications that you're presenting to the world? Are you being consistent in the way that you're presenting yourself to the world? Is there a core message that's coming through? And what's the personality that you're projecting? All of those things are really important in understanding how the world might see you. And I think once you've established whether you're creating a consistent message, what those messages are, then say to yourself, is that the thing that we should really be saying about ourselves? Are we communicating the one thing that really, really makes us different? So that analysis of what you're saying to the world is a really important way to understand whether you're saying the right things and whether you're being consistent in saying those. So that's the first thing you should do. And that review, I think, can take place by looking at communications, PR, websites, social media, all the things that are out there, but also looking at the other aspects of your experience, your tone of voice, your actions, your environment, your products. So moving on to the second one, you've already looked at what you're saying to the world. Let's assess what the world thinks about you. So spend some time looking at guest reviews, look at review sites, look at social media comments about you, look at what influencers are saying about you, look at what other hotel review sites or magazines or press are saying about you. Also look at the way that you're described in hotel guides or hotel groups or by the OTAs. So try and understand whether they're saying what you want them to say, whether there are some themes in there that they emphasize that maybe you hadn't really expected. And also, are there things that they value in their communications and their summary of yourself that you maybe haven't spotted? Because by looking at that, you can often understand the things that people really value from you that you may have missed, and the differences that people see in you that you may have missed. If there aren't any differences, then perhaps you're being too bland in your offer. So that's the second thing. Understand what the world is saying about you. The next thing is to focus on that promise. The diagram that I showed you with the concentric circles, the heart of that is the promise. So that's what you bring to the world. So think about your offer. Think about what you bring to the world, how you bring that thing to the world, and why you bring that to the world. And write down, a good way to do this is to put what, how, and why on a piece of paper. Write down underneath each one what makes you different. So what is it we offer the world? Highlight the things underneath what that you then make you different. How do we go about doing things? What's our behavior? And again, there'll be a whole load of things. Some might be generic, some might be things that make you different. So highlight the things that make you different. And then finally, why? Why do we exist? What is the thing that we want to bring people in the world? So write those things down. And the way to think about the why you exist is, think about what the world would miss if you weren't there. Think about the promise you're making to the customers. Once you have that, then you can assess whether you're consistently delivering it and whether this promise is still valid after COVID. So making sure you're very clear about your promise to the world is the third thing you should do. And to give you some examples of other promises, a really simple promise that Nike has is they exist to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And they caveat that with saying that everyone is an athlete. So it's a really clear and simple promise, and it allows them to assess what they're doing has the right attitude, whether it reinforces that. Starbucks talks about not coffee. It doesn't even mention coffee in its promise, but its promise is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. And Ritz-Carlton talks about ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. So it instantly gives you an idea of the way that people might behave and the customers they might expect. And the thing about a promise is it needs to be big, It needs to be broad enough to cover everything that you do. It needs to be simple so that everyone can understand it. It needs to be compelling so that people can get behind it. But it also needs to be actionable. People need to understand what they should do as a result of that. If you have a promise that's just fluff and that people who are putting a new service in place can't understand how that would influence that service, then the promise is no good. It needs to be actionable. And finally, it needs to be true. If you have a promise that you're not delivering, people will see through it very, very quickly. So big, simple, compelling, actionable, and true is key to a strong promise. And underpinning that promise are those pillars that I mentioned. And I think these are really important in hotels because hotels have some things that you can't change. So the fixed part of your pillars are your location, your architecture, your history. If you have a hotel that's in a wonderful location, clearly that's going to be part of your brand. If you have a hotel that's full of history and rich in history, clearly that's going to be a component of your brand. There are some things that are part of your pillars that are more flexible. So the interior design, the F&B you offer, the signatures that you have, the partnerships that you have, those are all semi-flexible parts of your brand. You can change them if you need to, but it wouldn't be something you could change overnight. But they can form part of your pillars. And then finally, there are pillars, elements in pillars that are much, much more flexible. So staff behavior, your communications, the sense of theatre, the way that you deliver a particular service, the artwork that you have in the hotel. So those different levels of pillars, the fixed, the semi-flexible and the flexible, and what you can do from those is you could define 5 or 6 of those pillars that really, really underpin that promise. So they're really important part of your brand. The fourth thing that I'll move on to is about values. And values are one of those things that everyone seems to define, but few seem to define very, very well. It's too often that you see companies or organizations or hotels that have values that are trust, integrity, excellence, teamwork. And you think, I wouldn't want to stay in a hotel that doesn't have integrity, that isn't about excellence, that isn't about teamwork. They're not values that differentiate. They're absolutely values that define what a good hotel should offer. So the important thing here is, yes, define the things that help you reach the baseline of the level of service you should be doing. Those aren't going to be the values that make a difference. Think about values that should make a difference to you. So again, in this time of COVID, before you relaunch, have a look at your values if you have them. If you don't have them, then define what values you should have based on the behavior that drives the way you do things. And rather than using simple words and single words, try and think about phrases, things that people will understand and are more actionable. And when you look at your values, ask yourself, are these values that you would expect from any organization? Are they the qualifiers to deliver what we should be delivering? Which values do we have that we've defined that really go beyond what people expect, that are differentiators? And are values clear enough so that people can actually understand and act on them? And also with your values, are we demonstrating these? Because it's interesting, those companies that have come out of COVID and have demonstrated themselves to be good companies are the ones that seem to be sticking to their values and demonstrating them. And the values are actually making a difference and influencing the way people behave. The companies whose values aren't making a difference at all are the companies that are failing. So what you need to do is make sure that whatever values you've defined, you are absolutely rigidly sticking to them and you truly believe in them and that they go beyond the obvious. The next thing I would advise you to do is to look at your brands. I said earlier that hotels have a tendency to create loads and loads of brands. And this is a typical example of where you have an operator brand, you might have a loyalty scheme, you might have a brand that's about the collection. You then have the hotel brand itself, but sitting underneath the hotel brand, you might have a branded restaurant or a bar or a branded event space. You might even have restaurant and bar names that sit under there. Hotels tend to accumulate brands, but for a consumer, it's really, really difficult to understand the relationship between them all. And as a consumer, you want to engage and have an emotional relationship with just a few brands. So adding lots of brands doesn't add value. It actually causes a lot of problems. So the next thing I would advise you to do is to look at all the brands that you have. Understand what brands you have. Do you have your brands for your hotels, your restaurants, your bars, your spas, your venues, your loyalty? Do you have brands that are also there for membership or partnerships? And ask yourself, which brand is most important to us? Which brand do we want the customer to be most aware of? And are those brands really, really adding value back to our hotel? Or are they taking value away from it and distracting people from the brand that we're trying to build for the hotel? I think particularly as the COVID situation becomes clearer, and we see the way that restaurants and F&B and bars might have to act differently, we should ask ourselves, can those brands exist on their own, or do they need to be much, much more closely linked to the hotel? So I would advise you to start looking at the brands that you have and deciding whether they were all necessary. They're very costly to maintain. They're confusing to consumers. The fewer brands you have, the more impact you can make and more value you can build around your hotel brand. So ask yourselves which ones you can cull, which ones are truly, truly necessary. The sixth thing goes to your team. Obviously, staff are absolutely crucial to reinforcing your brand. The experience you create about your brand is based on the behavior of your staff. And your staff will have been away for a while. They'll also have had changed priorities. We all have slightly changed priorities based on being in lockdown for such a long time. So in returning, your staff are going to need reminding or training about your promise and your values. And particularly if you've reassessed your values and you've reassessed your promise, your staff will need to understand how they can deliver these day to day. And they also need to be serious to see that you're serious about delivering them. So one of the things you can do, once you've defined your brand, you've defined your values, review your induction materials. Are they telling the story that you want to tell to your staff? Ask your staff then to think about the implications of the values that you've defined. Get them to think about the impact of those values on their day-to-day life and their day-to-day operations. What are the things that they would need to do differently to deliver those? And you can record those so that once people have said what the implications of the values are, that becomes part of your future induction. And you can also think about how you can engage people before they return. What are the things you can do to get people to think about the brand that you're trying to create? You know, can you say to people, send a photograph that sums up our hotel on its best day, or send a photograph that defines this type of value, or what are the things that you think we should be doing based on our value of engaging with the community? So engage your staff before they come back, get them to think about your values. The next thing I think that's really important, and again, it can be something that you do with a smaller group of staff, or you do it when people begin to return. But think about how priorities will have changed for your customers. Because as we've said, returning customers won't be the same. Attitudes, desires, and priorities will be different. But they're still going to expect you to be the same hotel that you were before you delivered, before COVID arrived. They still expect you to deliver the same things, but in your way. So I think it's really important to remember that you are the same person, you're the same hotel. You might deliver things in a slightly different way for people based on the result of this, but you need to think about what your new customer is going to want. How do you adapt your offer in response to what they need? What have they always expected from you that they will expect still to be there and they'll still value from you? And perhaps think about what might be the most important thing that you offer now, because if you'd offered a fantastic buzzy bar, that might not be something you can deliver straight away. So think about what will be most important to your returning customers when they come back. And I think it's really interesting if you pick up some of the things that are going on in the research about how people might respond to COVID. You know, there's potentially an increasing focus on health. There'll be there's more conscious consumption, which is about people thinking more about what they spend money on and the value of that. And also people seem to be increasing their love of local. So if you think about health, how can you demonstrate your safety within your brand? What will give people confidence that you're doing things that make them safe? With the conscious consumption, how do you show value? How do you show sustainability? How do you show that you're controlling waste and not spending money unnecessarily or wasting resources unnecessarily? And how can you engage with the local community? How can you show that you're supporting and connecting with them? How do you work more closely with your local suppliers? There are lots of pieces of research out there that are all about how priorities will change. And those are just 3 things I've picked. But use those research to look at what people think is going to change and how you might respond to it. The 8th thing is about how can you deliver new things your way. We know that hospitality is not going to be the same when you come back. There's going to be things like masks, social distancing. People are going to be much more cautious. There'll be a whole load of rules to learn. The community is going to be local to bring them in. Sorry, the community is going to be important to bring them in. But what's important with this is to think about how you can deliver new things your way. It's not just a matter of implementing these standards, but thinking about how you would implement it. Think about the language you would use. What signs would you put up? How would you explain these new procedures? And also what things you can put in place that would reinforce that brand that you've defined, that to show you are serious about your brand and show that you're doing things in your way. And what was interesting was looking at some of the response to the COVID situation. One of my favorites actually came from a pie company that sells pies to wholesale. And they had this business plan, and what they have is this wonderful sort of sense of humour. So coronavirus, didn't see that one coming. And that just shows it shows their brand to be something that's quite light-hearted, that's considerate and quite human. And I really liked that. So it showed a response to COVID that was in their tone of voice, in their style. McDonald's has done something that's typically McDonald's, but you see too many of people responding in the way that you see on the right here. You know, very, very formal language. It's not about the hotel. It could be any sign on any hotel. And I think it's really interesting when you look at those three examples. There's a spectrum of something that really shows a powerful brand to something that could be anybody. So how can you deliver new things your way? Think about the language you would use, think about the signage, think about what you would put in place, because that all links to your brand. And finally, my last point is when you come back, how do you celebrate who you are? It's not going to be a big bang opening. You know, I think the way that brands will reopen up in the hospitality sector will be much more of a trickle, much more incremental. It'll be quite difficult. It'll be quite experimental. And I think this gives you an opportunity to be quite open and honest and quite human in the way you do things. And again, it can reflect your brand if you've defined it very clearly. People will want you back, and I think people will be really happy to see you back, and they'll want to celebrate your return. So firstly, think about how you can engage with your internal team to remind them of who you are, and what can you give them that makes them feel proud to come back and represent your hotel. How can you re-engage with your community of local guests? People will come back to you. They'll be desperate to come back to you. And people will want to see you back, and they'll be happy to see you back. So how can you re-engage with them? What can you tell them and give them and offer them to make them come back to you? How can you engage with your local community? I think community has become increasingly important throughout this. And brands have really reached out to their local community and done things that have benefited them. So how can you continue that? What things can you keep in place that will engage? And is there one thing that you can do that shouts the world we're back? Is there something that you can put in place that brings people in and gets you noticed again? So that was a very quick dive through 9 actions you can take. And I think the summary that I'd like you to take out of this is that brand should absolutely be at the heart of your return. If you just open up as normal, people will just see you as the general return to normality. But brand should be at the heart of it. This gives you a real opportunity to define what makes you different and reinforce what makes you different. You can use it to drive your actions, to define what you're going to be doing differently. And it also allows you to state your difference. So in those 9 things, what I urge you to do over the next few weeks is really define your brand. Make sure you've nailed it. Make sure it's different. Use your brand to influence what you do and how people see you, and stick to it. Don't try and change just because we're in a completely different situation. You're still you. What's changed is the way that you're responding to the world. So stick to who you are and what's made you really successful up to now, but respond in a different way. Because you need to stand for something in order to stand out. And as a powerful, powerful brand, the more that you stand out, the more value that you can bring to your customers, your staff, your shareholders, and to you as a business. So that's all I really had to say. So I will stop talking now and I will pass you back to Georgia.
Thanks, Mark. Well, that was an incredible session. Thank you for your time today. Just got a few questions coming in, so I'd just like to run these through with you if you're happy to. Obviously, you've run through your 9 key actions there for people to take, and with now the government's change in approach to the lockdown, providing a July date for hospitality businesses to come back. How far in advance do you think people need to be implementing these strategies and these actions that you're talking about? Is this something that people need to be doing right now, and spacing them out, or is it can this be done over a longer period of time?
I think the sooner you can do them, the better. The more that you've defined, the better for when you relaunch. So if you're very clear about what your brand is, that can then influence the way that you come back in July. If you're clear about who you are, what you stand for, and how you go about doing things, then you can make sure that they're implemented as you come back. And you can make sure that your staff understand them as well when they come back. So do it now. I think you have an opportunity to take stock of who you are and what you are. And you can do that now and actually launch with something that's very, very strong.
Brilliant. And you mentioned before about obviously relooking at your values, making sure that they are clear promises that you can action, and obviously avoiding those very generic words, trustworthy and teamwork. If you are tweaking your values at this time, obviously everyone at the same time is going to be making a lot of marketing noise. How can you position yourself with those new values? Have you got any tips on where those can be communicated with?
Sure. I mean, I think when you're looking at values, there are some values that are absolutely inherent in a business, and when you look at a business, they often have values that are not written down, but they're implicit in the way people behave. So what you should try and do is capture what you do when you're at your very, very best. Write down description of what you do on your very, very best day. Those can form the basis of your values. There might be some changed values that you have based on COVID that you need to put in place. So think about whether there are any values that you might want to add to your existing ones that are values that you might not exhibit now, but you want to exhibit. So you can have a balance of current values and a couple of aspirational values. And then when you communicate those, what I don't recommend is communicating them by saying our values are X, Y, and Z. That never works because nobody ever believes it.
No.
It's much more important that your staff understand them, and it's just demonstrated in the way that they behave. And also it's implicit in your communications and your actions. So use them internally rather than sticking them on your website.
Brilliant. Thank you. And just the last question, obviously everything is changing all the time, and you've already mentioned that this is going to be a very challenging new world for hospitality and brands within it. Do you think brands now need to become, obviously with these 9 key actions, more agile with how they react, or do you feel that obviously you're saying that they need to be true to themselves, but obviously how they respond is different? Is it a key now to become more agile with your branding?
I think the way that you express your branding can certainly become more agile. I think your brand should be absolutely defined. You should have a core brand that's absolutely unwavering, that's about who you are and what you believe in. The way that you express that can be more agile. So the actions that you might take in response to something should be based on your core definition, but you can respond to things. So I don't think it's about the brand being agile. I think it's the way that you express it and the experience that you create as a result of that being agile. It's a bit like a person. You are who you are. Your definition is there. Who you are and why you exist is there. Actually, what's important is the way that you respond as an individual. So response is more important than definition.
Brilliant. Completely agree. And we've just had another question through that asks, will safety be the most important value, and how do you reconcile that with hospitality, especially in small independent businesses?
That's an interesting one. I think the values should come from the hotel itself. So the values are what you believe in. If your new value that you're putting in place is we believe in keeping our customers safe, that's a great value to have. Sorry, I've forgotten the second part of the question.
It's how do we reconcile that with hospitality, especially in small independent businesses?
Well, I think safety is something that you can easily reconcile with hospitality. I think keeping somebody safe and looking after them is crucial to any business, and I think it doesn't. A good host will make sure that their customers and their staff are kept safe. So I don't think it's at odds at all with hospitality. In fact, I think it's absolutely at the core of hospitality. It's about making sure that you're safe to be able to enjoy the experience that you're offering. So I think that is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. That's all the questions that we've had through. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you again, Mark, for your time and sharing your expertise. We will be following up to everybody on the session today with the video of your masterclass. So we'll make sure that everyone can be working on those 9 key actions. And just to everyone else, thank you for joining us today. I've sent a link on the chat earlier to join the mailing list to hear about our next upcoming sessions. And some of the other bits and pieces we have going on at Custard with our marketing reports and weekly bulletins. So please feel free to join our mailing list. And I guess the last thing for me to say is thank you, and we'll hopefully see you very soon.
Great. Thank you, everyone.